Hi, welcome to NDE TV. I'm Peggy Robinson. Today's guest is Brian Hoyland, and he's going to share his near-death experience with us. Hi, Brian.
Hi, how are you?
Good. So start wherever you like and take as long as you like.
Well, I guess I should start with that. I was really pretty healthy guy before my first incident happened. Um, but I got started getting really sick, started getting really tired, didn't know what was happening to me, and I ended up going into heart failure. And I was in end stage chronic heart failure for 4.5 months before I had my NDE. Um, But that first one, it really was a surprise. I had ran 5 miles the week before I ended up having that heart failure. But so it just caught me by surprise. My heart rate had gone up to over 300 beats per minute. So when the paramedics came out, I waited probably too long, but I was at home with my kids. We were home alone. My wife had gone up to a family weekend with her cousins and her sister, and so it was it was just me and the kids, and my kids were pretty little. So this was a hard thing for me to do. I wasn't used to calling a paramedic to come help me, but it felt like a gorilla was jumping on my chest, and it was the most intense pain I'd ever felt. And I was just so sick, and finally the next day I couldn't see very well. I couldn't walk, so I had to crawl down the stairs. I thought if I got to the living room, it would be a little more comfortable, but that didn't work. So when the paramedics came, they ended up cutting my shirt off. They had to put the paddles on, and I'm like, is this really necessary? I thought I might have food poisoning or something. I didn't think my heart was the problem because I was a really healthy guy. And so they said, yeah, your heart is going over 300 beats per minute. We're really afraid what's going to happen. You're going to go into cardiac arrest any minute. So they gave me the quick shock, and I actually felt a lot better after that. It brought my heart rate down some, and so that took some relief off, but but not enough. I remember them putting me on the bed or whatever, the cart to take you out, and I saw my kids' faces as I was going out, but then everything just went blank. I don't remember anything else from that experience. I know that I was still awake because they had gotten all kinds of information from me. So I was talking to them all the way to the hospital. And even at the hospital for a while, I was talking until I went, they had to intubate me because I guess I had gone completely under. And so they were really concerned that I was going to die. They called my wife, had her come back from her up north with her family. But that's what my life was like for the next 4.5 months. I was in and out of the hospital constantly. The doctors were chasing, trying to find out what was going on with me. And it turns out that I have some pretty severe autoimmune diseases, one in which attacks all my organs, turns the healthy tissue into scar tissue. And with the heart, it really devastated my heart. I did send you a picture of it, so that way, maybe you can put that on. I don't know, but yeah, it totally ate away my entire heart. It was really a devastated heart. But I'll save some of how we know how bad it was until later, because that kind of comes in play a little bit later in the story. But so the next 4.5 months, I was in and out of the hospital, and I was in constant pain. They gave me a defibrillator. Initially, they thought that I would never see this happen again. They didn't know what had happened to me, but they didn't think that was my heart was that bad. They didn't know what was going on, but they thought, hey, this guy's pretty healthy. There's no way he's gonna, have a need for this. But in case he does, we want to have wear this thing. So they put it in on my side, and that thing was a new technology, so it was shocking me when it shouldn't have been shocking me, and it wasn't shocking me at other times when it should. A lot of times it did shock me when it should, but it was powerful. This thing, they said it was twice as powerful as a police stun gun. And so I don't know if they had it set to
Wow.
the setting because I was a pretty muscular guy at the time, but this thing was so powerful that the first time it shocked me, it buckled me in half. I was
Wow.
sleeping, so I really didn't have any control over my body, but it was so powerful that when it buckled me in half, my knees hit my face, broke my nose,
Oh
my
my
whole face
gosh.
up. I thought somebody broke in the house and was doing a home invasion and hit me with a
Oh my
bat.
gosh.
It was. And I was crawling on the floor trying to find, this person that wasn't there. And my wife's yelling, telling me to get back into bed. And, she's like, I think you got shocked. I think you got shocked. And it was just a harrowing experience. But so we kept going through all these different things. We went to different clinics, renowned clinics around the world, and trying to find out what was going on. And one after the other was saying, well, we can't do anything with you. We can't help you. We can't do this. Finally, we found out what it was. I had to do a little investigation on my own. The doctors just aren't usually very equipped at finding autoimmune disease. It's a difficult thing to diagnose. But I started looking at the differential diagnoses for what was going on with me. And I said, well, what about this one? Can you guys check for this one? It says you can just do a biopsy in some of the common areas that if people have it in their heart, they're going to have it in other areas. And they said, yeah, we can do that. That sounds reasonable. So they did. Turned out I did have that particular one. It's called sarcoidosis. And sarcoidosis can affect a lot of different organs, but when it affects your heart or your lungs or certain areas, it can be devastating. And when it's your heart, it's a killer. So they ended up doing some treatment, but it was a little too late because January 16th is when I had or 15th, one of the two. It was kind of at 12 o'clock at night, so I don't know how you want to weigh it out, but I started going into another really bad heart arrhythmia. And I had been on treatment for the sarcoidosis for maybe 2 weeks, I think, at that time. So it really wasn't long enough for it to have any effect. But I go into this arrhythmia, and this one felt a little different. I knew things were coming to a head. I had felt like my energy and my life was just being sapped out of me for this 4.5 months. But this one I knew was different. I just didn't have the fight left. I felt like I had just been beaten down. So I was in the ER for 7 hours before this. I mean, it was really bad. They said that they needed to get me up to the ICU, but they were too afraid to transport me because of how bad my heart was. Finally, they felt like they had it stabilized enough to where they could take me up there, and they were willing to risk it. So they got me up there, and as they were transferring me into the ICU bed, I started going into a really bad arrhythmia where they couldn't get control of it again. And they called in the crash team. And when they do that, it's kind of a nerve-wracking experience in and of itself. During that time in the ER, I was confessing my sins. I was talking with God. I was like, I wasn't the greatest person. I didn't always treat people nicely, or I was looking out for myself more than I was for others. I had a more introspective look at myself, and I really understood that I could have done better with my life. And so I was able to talk to God about that. But when they brought that crash team in, it was really difficult. There's people, it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz when those flying monkeys come in and they're tearing that scarecrow all apart. They're pulling your arms different ways, your legs different ways. There's people surrounding you. And the whole room was filled with people and running in and out, doing all kinds of different tasks. But that my body had to be strapped down because they were, giving me shocks, try to keep my heart rate under control. They were doing so many different things, but my mind was just racing with like, what's going to happen? When is it going to happen? I knew I was going to die. So that wasn't so much of an issue. It was just how and when. And, I getting all these voices that I couldn't really pray at all. But then I noticed that there was this crucifix at my feet. That was really the only place I could look because, being strapped down, you got doctors and nurses all around you. The only place they don't need to be is at the bottom of your feet. So down there, I had a clear shot and happened to be right where the crucifix was. And so, I just asked, I said, please help me to pray, Mother Mary, and for whatever reason, it just, all of a sudden I felt this peace. Like, I knew I was going to die. I knew that that Jesus had been there with me. I could feel that his presence, but it was like all of a sudden the chaos just slowed down. And I just started praying. It was so easy. I just told him, I said, I'm ready to go. Whenever you're ready to take me, this pain's too much. And this whole time leading up to it, all the doctors kept saying, "Oh, you're surviving all these things because you're so strong." And I was like, "You don't have a clue. It's not because I'm definitely not strong. Clearly, it killed me, so I wasn't strong enough to survive it.
You didn't
But it
have a
was,
choice.
yeah, I had no choice. It's just, and sometimes that's how life is, isn't it? That we don't really have a choice, and
Mhm.
we resist it. And I think that was the hardest thing for me, is I kept trying to resist all these things and trying to fight. And it's good to fight. It's good to do our part in it. But sometimes we just have to accept the fact that, I can only do so much, and I can still enjoy myself even despite that pain and that suffering that I was going through. I had 4.5 months of extra time with my family. I could have been dead the first incident that I had, or any of the number of them that happened in between. So I felt this peace just come over me, and I really felt like, okay, I'm ready to go. And I closed my eyes and I just was waiting for it to happen. And that's when the nurses were telling me, "Hey, Brian, we need you to open your eyes. We need you to, to keep talking to us." They'd been asking me questions like, what's your profession, and, what's your address, and, stuff I already knew that they knew. They're just trying to keep me with them. And I said, "You know what? I don't want to talk." But this was the hardest thing for me to get out. It was so forced, and like my voice sounded gurgled. It sounded like I was at the bottom of a well and I was listening from the top. It didn't sound like me. It sounded like it was separate from me. It was as if my every effort went into trying to just get that out. And as soon as that happened, I just said, "God, please take me." And that's when I felt this shake and this pop, and I was ejected from my body. And so now I'm in this dark void, and I'm looking at this like vast open space, and it's just completely dark, but it looked so enormous. It was like looking into space, just no luminous beings. But I was instantly impressed by the complete silence. Having gone from this chaotic hospital room with so many noises,
Mhm.
and if you've ever been in a hospital, you know what it sounds like when they
Mhm.
call it cold flu. It's crazy. It's pandemonium in there. And
The
so all,
contrast of
yeah,
all that, and yeah.
yes, it was a huge contrast, and it was amazing because that silence was so peaceful, and I was just inundated with this peace and this love and this joy, this immense feeling. It was like that feeling of when I was praying, when I was able to pray, and that connection that I felt. It was like that. You know how when you sometimes when you say a prayer, and you feel like you're not alone, you feel like God's really hearing you. It feels great. It feels wonderful.
Mhm.
You know, that's what it was like, but to such a level I couldn't even put a nomenclature on it. It was just so vast. But I'm looking at this dark void, and I was just mystified that I'm seeing this dark void, but I'm feeling this beautiful peace and this love. And I'm looking at this void, and I said, "I don't even want this without God." And that's when I realized that, and it wasn't, I should say this, my intelligence immediately increased too. So I was able to think, when I say this is what I said, it was such a deep, well thought out thought. It had many ins and outs. It wasn't just this little tiny thought about, well, I don't even want this, it was vast. It was like every single possible explanation or decision that could come along with that was all addressed at one time. But I realized I didn't want to have existence, even if I felt peace and love and was just sitting there in this dark, peaceful void. I didn't want that without God. I knew that it wasn't coming from this darkness. I knew that this had to be coming from somewhere else, but I just didn't feel complete.
Mhm.
And at this point, I realized, I'm seeing into this dark void. It like suddenly my intelligence was able to grasp this fact that I'm looking into the depths of it. I could see how vast it was. I could see how big this big space was. It was enormous. But it was because there was light shining into it. There wasn't light coming out of it. It was light shining in. And this light was coming from behind me. And I could see in 360 degrees. What was cool about my vision is that not only could I see in that 360 degrees, but what I focused on would grab my focal point. My highest amount of attention was on that. So as soon as I realized that that light was behind me, I made a decision that I wanted to turn. Now, I don't know why I did that. Maybe I'm still slow on the uptake, even though I had that increased intelligence. Because as soon as I turned, I was still looking the entire time and still seeing the dark void behind me. But my focus had changed because I was now looking at this bright light. And that's where all this light was emanating from. It was far away. I couldn't put a distance on it. It was farther than anything I could ever imagine seeing. But it was so magnificent. This light was just resplendent. And it was just beckoning for me to come to it. But it didn't force me to. It was just looking like this beautiful light, and I could feel the love and the peace and the joy emanating from it. And as soon as I said, I want to be with that light, boom, I was there. And that quick little thought, I remember taking every single step to get there, but I was traveled so quickly that it was as if I instantaneously got there. So time was completely distorted.
Mhm.
But what was really interesting about it is that I didn't feel any inertia. I didn't feel wind on my face or anything that would have given me the impression that I had traveled so quickly, but yet here I was so quickly there. So I'm standing in front of this light, and I could just see how beautiful it was. It was the brightest thing I've ever seen, and it wasn't hurting my eyes. And I mean, that was really impressive to me. I was like, how is this not hurting my eyes? This is beautiful light, and it's so powerful that I could actually feel the power of it, the beauty of it, just like palpable. It was just emanating into me. And as I'm looking at this light, I was trying to find the ends of it. And I'm not sure why I wanted to find the ends of it, but I'm a curious guy. So I was trying to find the ends of it. But what was really cool is that I was still looking straight ahead like I am at you. So I'm looking at this light, but then I'm also looking to the left and I'm looking to the right. I'm looking up and down all at the same time. And this is just, it's still, to me, it's bizarre. I can't do it now, obviously. But in my memory of this, I can see that I was going in all those directions while still looking at the light. But yet, when I was traveling on the left and the right and the up and the down, it was as if I was driving in a car, and you're able to see the scenery as you go through. You still remember everything that you saw before. Well, I was actually seeing everything at the same time and still traveling with it. And I don't know how long I was looking at this, but I never found the end of it. I never found the end of this light in any of the directions that I went. And I knew instantly at that point that I wasn't going to find the end of it and that this was God, or at least some eminence of God. I don't know that, I didn't see his physical body, although he is a spirit, so maybe I won't see a physical body. But I knew that this was something that was of God. And so as soon as that recognition came in, I heard him say that I could enter in to the light. And so, of course, I went right into the light. I mean, this was just an amazing invitation. And all the while, everything that I did, I had to have the inclination to do it. I was never forced. It wasn't as if he was, pulling me. And although I felt magnetically drawn, like this was where my heart belonged, but it wasn't as if I was coerced into it. It was as if I was impelled towards it, from within. And when I think of how the time aspect was, because I tell this story in a linear fashion because it makes sense.
Mhm.
I haven't how to master telling it all at once, but it felt like it was all happening simultaneously. It's kind of like, if you take a tapestry and it's woven together, it's got all these different threads that come together, right? And each thread would be, a different memory or a different experience or a different thought, but it all makes one huge tapestry. And as you're looking at it, you see the whole completed process or product, and you see this beautiful tapestry. But if we were to take each thread apart, we'd have those individual pieces. And that's how time was. It was as if everything was all together, but you could also single it out and go to each little thing. So I'm had all my memories of my whole life. And as far as I know, later on, I don't know that I recognize it at that moment, but I was able to have memories of other people as well. So not that I felt like I lived them, but I was able to see things. Nothing was really hidden from me. But as I'm going through this light, I was really impressed by the love that was rushing into me. It was as if just a river of love was just pouring into my soul. And it was like it was shaving off these ugly pieces of me, the hurt and the anger that I had from, having a bad heart and all these things. And, I will say this, because I've been open about it in some of my other interviews, but people often wonder, well, how did you get this disease? I was given the anthrax vaccine when I was in the military. And so that's what developed into autoimmune diseases, which eventually ended up leading to this whole situation. But so there was some anger because I knew that there were some things that had been done to me in the military, and I knew I had some limitations because of it, but I didn't know to the extreme. And even that was taken away. I all the anger, all the feelings I had from the military or other aspects of my life, all that stuff was healed. And it was because this love was just rushing into me and just healing those broken places. And I realized that the suffering that I had gone through in the ER and all the 4.5 months before that, I don't think that I would have experienced the love to the same degree had I not had those holes, those broken places to be filled and healed by this love, because I wouldn't have had that contrast again, that beautiful difference in being broken and being hurt, and then being restored in this way. It was fantastic. And I still get such a joy out of that, knowing that is awaiting me again, because, I've gone through a little bit more suffering since then. But as I'm going through this, I said, I want to see Jesus. And as soon as I said that, that's when this light opened up, and I was instantly in this, like, I don't want to say it was, because it certainly wasn't all of heaven, but it was like an entry room. It was massive. It was bigger than the dark void that I initially had come into. So it was much larger than that. Could have swallowed that up easily. But I knew that this was not the entirety of heaven. I was only being given a slight vision of this entry place. And in this place, there were so many beings. I couldn't possibly have counted them all. And they were like human torsos, but magnificently lit with light, beautiful light, sparkling lights. These lights were so beautiful and so gorgeous. It was just fascinating to see all these lights. But in the center of all these lights was one that was just so much more beautiful, so much more resplendent than the others. They paled in comparison. And it was the exact same magnificence as the light that I had come through, and which was now surrounding us. And in the atmosphere, there was like this greenish, pinkish kind of atmosphere. I can't really describe any better than that, to say it was kind of a greenish pinkish, because it was colors that I have never seen before or since. So but it was beautiful, and it was actually alive. Like the atmosphere itself was alive, and it was just love, and it was peace, and and joy. And so I knew that this being that was in the center, I knew it was Jesus. He didn't have to raise his hand up. Like I said, my intelligence was so much higher than it obviously is now. But I know, but I just said, Jesus, I want to see your face. It was beautiful to see these lights, but I wanted to see what he looked like. I wanted to have that interaction with him. And as I said that, his face started to come together. So I was able to see his face. But what really blows me away is that I wasn't able to lay down the memory. So as his face, like as my eyes were taking in what his face looks like, it's kind of like those little animation flip books that people have, where you got the one picture and the guy's like this, and then at the end you see this whole long race or something, or whatever the animation might be. But that's what it was like, is that I was taking it in, but I was instantly forgetting because my brain was obviously dead back in the hospital room. And I didn't have anything else to draw it upon. I never seen Jesus before. I never seen that kind of magnificence in my life. So I wasn't able to reproduce that image. But I was seeing that he was smiling at me. And this was really important because as I'm looking at him, we started going through my life review. And I was hard on myself. He didn't seem to be really hard on me. He was trying to explain to me why the things that I had done were wrong. Now I told you I had confessed everything that I could think of, back in that hospital room. But this is what gets me, is that there were so many things that I didn't think were wrong, things that, I had justifications for. And, I did actually have justifications for them. It wasn't like I was out doing things to try to be wrong or to do things sinfully, but I didn't make the best choices. I didn't have as much mercy for somebody else. So when somebody did something wrong to me, I was like, well, that's your mistake. You shouldn't have done that. And here's the consequence. And, instead of extending mercy, and I realized with his help into my intellect that, there's so many times that he had forgiven me for doing the very same things to him, where I wanted to do what I wanted to do. And yet he would forgive me. And he showed me how he forgave me. And I couldn't forgive this person for doing something so much lesser than that to me. And, it really hurt. It really made me realize just how selfish and self-centered that I could be, and as humans, we all are like that. And I'm not going to point fingers at anybody else. I can point them all at myself because I have plenty of things that I went through and saw that I did. But, it's hard for us to recognize that in this life, because those justifications feel really strong. They feel valid, and I fight with that even now when, having come back, I have to fight with that and say, I'm not really being fair about this. And, I have to kind of let go of some of those that need to defend myself all the time over things that I really don't need to defend myself over. Mm-hmm. So, that's a work in progress, but that's what he was showing me how I need to be. And, there it's really easy because there's no temptations. It's, it's all peace and love and joy. So everything's wonderful. It's so easy to feel that same kind of love. But as we're going through this life review and he's showing me all these things, he was explaining to me 3 things that I need to do with my life. And he was prepping me, obviously, I know, because he let me come back, and I'll explain that part afterwards. And like I said, this was all happening simultaneously, so it just makes more sense for me to tell it this way, because this is kind of how I remember it. But so he told me I need to pray more. And with that, while it is good to pray on my knees and, say my prayers and do all the things that I do, ritualistically, those things are absolutely necessary for me. I need to do those even probably more than most people. But he also was showing me that I need to turn my life into a prayer. Putting everything in order. First comes God, and then everything else is going to fall into place in the proper order. So when I love my wife and my children, and I do that because I love God, my life with my wife and my children improves. And when I see that person cut me off on the road, and I don't do a reaction to them, and I'm like, okay, God, I'll take this little insult, or this, because it's not usually an insult, but to me, it feels like one sometimes, but I let that go. It's beautiful. I'm living a life of prayer, of turning things over to God. And, it can be something so simple as picking up a piece of trash on the ground just so that somebody else doesn't have to see it, doesn't have to interrupt somebody else's day. And when you do that, a simple kindness, knowing that you're doing it for God, but also that somebody else around you can have a better life, even if it's small, those little small things can add up. And, we can live a life of prayer by doing our things in our life that way. So the next thing he told me was that I had to suffer joyfully. Now, this one really, people struggle with this. People really struggle with suffering. I'm able maybe to suffer a little bit easier than others. Going through what I went through is certainly, I don't know that anything else is ever going to compare with that. But suffering joyfully doesn't mean we have to enjoy the suffering. It means that we accept what's happening to us and we say, this is the way things have turned out. Might not be fair, might not seem fair at all. But if we trust that God loves us the way that he does, and which is far more than we love ourselves, believe it or not, a lot of us don't think God loves us so much because we don't get what we want. But the reality is maybe what we want would be the worst thing for us. I mean, you can see how people turn when they get all kinds of things that seem really good, and they are goods, but it turns them into a totally different person, somebody that's ugly and somebody that's not who they used to be. And we shouldn't be wanting those things if they're going to turn us into something bad. We just don't know that at that time. But that's where acceptance is such an important piece, because we can still have joy in our lives. Those 4.5 months, I had a minor amount of acceptance. I knew I was going to die, and I accepted that. I struggled with when and how, but now I don't struggle with that, because I understand that God has this plan and he's going to work it to my advantage. He's going to do everything to make my life better. And I trust him. I'm not worried about it. And
It
having
makes
that
me
trust.
makes me think of a saying I've heard. It says, let go and let God.
Mm. That's a great saying. Excuse me. I got that. That really hit me, because that's exactly what it is. I probably should have waited till I swallowed before I got all excited. But that's what it is. Why do we feel the need to always control everything? We don't have the control that we think we do, but we are a prideful type of creature. We think that we can do so many things. We think we can maneuver everybody and we can get what we want if we do enough of this or that. And you know, it might work. It doesn't mean we don't still try to do things. I mean, we've got to put in our effort into things too. We can't just sit there and say, oh, okay, well, God, I'm going to wait here until you do this for me, because maybe that's not going to work either. He does expect us to walk a little bit on our own, but it's like a gentle mother. A mother, she doesn't take her little brand new little toddler who's trying to learn how to walk and say, hey, I'm going to take you over to the hard concrete and let you just practice over here. She takes him to the grass, and maybe has her hands around him at first, and as he gets more comfortable, she starts to pull her hands further away. And if he falls down, it's no big deal. It's on the grass. But then when he's sturdy and he's ready to go, now we can go on the concrete and have a real walk. And yeah, you might fall and scrape your knee a little bit, but you're going to learn. But mom's going to be there to make it better. And that's how God is. He's so gentle. He's just so loving and caring that he's like that mom. He always wants the best for you. It's actually hurt when you're hurt, but at the same time, a little bit of hurt helps us to understand that life is rough sometimes, that we have to make good decisions. We can't be careless. We can't just be carefree and just throw everything to the wind and think that it's going to turn out all right. We have to have prudence. And that's a great lesson. I mean, what kind of a mother would just say, go ahead, go play in traffic, no big deal. Those cars will stop. Well, that's a lot of faith in something that isn't going to happen, because there's human beings that are going to have a different say in it, right? And so that was what I really understood the suffering joyfully to be, is that, we just have to accept it. We don't have to enjoy it. It's not like, we're going to be singing, hey, I'm suffering. And you might, because when you realize you're in God's will, no matter what, it's always joyful. If I know that I'm doing what God wants, I can always rest assured in that, and I can be happy. It's when I go against God that I really should be upset and I should be worried. And so then the last thing he told me was that I needed to share his love. And this one sounds really easy, but for me, I was able to share his love with people that I was comfortable with, people that I, knew loved God. That's easy. That's simple. We can sit around and talk about God and we have a great conversation. It's the people who don't understand God, who maybe even don't like God. It's still trying to show them his love. And sometimes that's just, I'll have to take a little bit of abuse because they got whatever disproportionate anger caused by something. Usually it's some sort of a sin that they are feeling guilty with, that they don't want to acknowledge. I'm not giving this up. I don't want that God. Boom, they're closed off. Well, it doesn't help if I'm sitting there just ramming stuff down on them, and so I've had to learn to pull back and just still love them the way that God does, despite the fact that they might not love God right now. Knowing that He loves us all, He loves us so much that He even wants that person to go to heaven. Well, I can't deny God that. I got to try to do my part, and if I come into contact with this person, I've got to share His love any way I can. And that's just being a decent human being at sometimes, just to, in fact, that's more of a Christian, is to be able to take like Jesus did. They're spitting on him and they're whipping him and they're doing all these things to him unjustly. Where do I get off thinking I don't have to pick up my cross and carry it too?
And he
So,
said, God, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do.
right. Yeah.
While he's being tortured.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing? And when you see God like this, it's like you realize exactly what He was intending. And that's what it was. It's like there's times that I have done the same thing. I mean, and maybe even worse, because I did know God, although I honestly, I tried to live my life thinking, I'm so accomplished at doing these things. And I really did have an easy life. Everything I wanted to do, I could do it. I was gifted in school. I was gifted in sports. I was gifted in a lot of areas. And so, it was easy for me to do the things I like to do. And they always came easy to me. But with that, I did a lot of back patting. I didn't thank God a whole lot for that. But when He broke me down and took away all those things, when I was really suffering, I couldn't read. I loved to read, but I couldn't read. So He took that away. I couldn't work out. So I loved to work out, but wasn't able to. He took that away. And all I was left with was Him. It was either being bitter and angry, which was certainly not helpful. That made me even feel worse when I went through my little couple of days of just being angry about, well, how come this happened to me? And then I just turned it over. But the more I've turned it over, the better I felt. And so that's what, that sharing the love is just realizing that we all can be in that broken place. And when we're in that broken place, it's helpful when other people are willing to help carry that cross with us. Even if we don't realize that we're carrying this cross, we all are. But having somebody else say, you know what, I'm not going to pile onto it. I'm not going to make that cross heavier or trip you or do whatever else to get in your way. I'm going to help you out. Even sometimes just walking away can be a help to a person because they're just not ready for it. Maybe the next person will be the one who can really help grow that seed. But if I can plant a seed, if I can just show them kindness, that might be the start. So after we had this discussion, then he this memory of mine came to because like I said, I had all these memories of my whole life, but it was this one in particular of when my great grandmother had died, and I was about 5 or 6 years old, and I remember how devastating this was to my family. Everybody loved her. She was the matriarch. She just held the whole family together. So this was really a hard loss for the family. And she had a lot of kids, so this was a big family. And I remember all the people that I loved, my aunts and my uncles, they were all crying, people I never saw cry before. And as a little kid, it really hurt me. I love these people, and I loved my great grandma. She was the sweetest lady. But I remember going home, and this was in Iowa. We lived in Minnesota, so we had to drive home that night after the funeral. And so we got home late, and I was tired, but I wanted to pray. And I got down on my knees. I don't know that I ever got down on my knees before, but this time I did. And I remember it because it was a long prayer. I mean, I was really praying. And I got this feeling that my prayer was answered. I felt just like peaceful. But what I was praying for was a long life, not for my own selfish benefit. It was because I didn't want my family to be hurt like that by my death, And what was so interesting about this is that I knew that it was answered, And so I asked God, I said, I thought you answered that prayer. I didn't feel like this was a long life. I was only like 40 years old when I died. So I thought, that's really not that old, God. You gotta, I did mean a long life, right? He said that he did hear that prayer and he did answer it. And it was yes, that he was going to give me a long life. But it wasn't just for my family of my youth, because they would have gotten over my death at 40 years old. I lived a decent enough life. They would have been sad, of course, but it wouldn't have been like it was if you lost a child, right? But it was because I had this new family of my own, and he had given me that yes to preserve them from the hurt. And then he said, but why do you want to go back? And it blew me away, because I didn't want to go back. I wanted to stay there. It was the best I've ever felt in my entire life. I never felt so much at home as I did there. And so, I really tried to think about it. I'm like, well, my family, they need me. And he's like, well, I love your family more than you do. And it wasn't like a mean thing, like you just don't love them enough, because he knew how much I love my family. I was willing to do anything for them, even to go back for them, which is a huge sacrifice, because I'd have to go back to this painful, suffering body, right? And leave this beautiful, joyful, peaceful, loving heaven. But what he was showing me was that he had them to protect them. He was going to be the one to take care of them. And that I didn't have to worry about that if I chose to stay. And so he gave me this profound understanding that no matter what, he loved them more than I do. And so I knew that wasn't the right answer. I knew that I had to really find deep within me what it was that would be worth going back for. And so I realized that it was to go back and to be able to do what he told me, to share his love. Despite the suffering, and constantly pray, because I had to be able to be close to him if I'm going to try to share his love. But to really share his love, this God who loved me so much to care for me through this entire process that I'd been going through. He never made me feel alone, even though often I was alone. And you go into a doctor's office and you see these doctors who kind of look at you like a system. They don't look at you necessarily like a human being. They look at you as like you're this system that I got to try to figure out what's wrong with it. And you're a heart right now, and you're a kidney now, and you're this and that. And so there was a lot of times that I was alone, but I never felt alone. I felt like he was always with me, and I just wanted to go back and share his love with everybody else for him, because of how much he loved me. That love that he had for me, despite all the things that I had done, I thought, wow, that's the best reason for me to go back. He said, yes, that's the reason. And he said, you can go back. And so I said, yeah, I want to go back. And as soon as I said that, it was like, boom, you got to go. And that my time in heaven was over. I had to start walking back, and I had to go back the exact same way that I had come in. But it was as if now I was walking through concrete. Like my legs just didn't want to move. I guess I should say this too. I didn't actually have legs. I didn't see them. I don't know that I didn't have them. I shouldn't say I didn't have them, because I could have, but I didn't see a physical body. But I also didn't feel like I was oozing all over the place. I felt like I was somewhat contained, but I didn't feel like I had like the same kind of a body. And I suppose that's because
Were
my
you
body was
like the spirits you saw, like trunks?
I didn't see what I actually look like, so I really don't know. Yeah, so I could have been like that with the sparkling lights, but I don't know that I would have been instantly going into heaven either. I think where I was at, there was a process that was still under development, if you will. I don't think that it was like, hey, here, you just go right in, because there's people standing where I was at, and I certainly wasn't the closest to Jesus. And people often ask, well, why didn't you just run up and hug Jesus? I'm like, well, it didn't really cross my mind, but it wasn't like, it wasn't as if I was so presumptive to think that I'm going to just run up to him. There was so much love between us but I also had this profound respect, more than respect. It was, I saw my creator. I saw the person who loves my soul more than I do. And it wasn't as if I wanted to say, well, hey, we're just equals now. I realized the insignificance of who I was, and that the only thing that made me significant was his love for me. So that just was and it was beautiful too. It wasn't, a lot of people get so scared by these things, but it was beautiful because I felt so cared for. I felt, like here we always have to fight and scrap for everything, and we got to fight our way through life, and we got to fight our way through traffic. We got to fight our way through all these different things. And not there. There, we were cared for, and that's the biggest reason why I wanted to come back, is because I knew that he's going to be with me even here. You still have to do a little bit more struggle down here, but it's so much easier knowing that we have this loving God. But that
I can't help
concrete
but
feeling,
wonder if that blackness that some people see and then the white bright is both different ways of like a curtain, like keeping us from seeing fully what is there.
yeah, that's very well could be, because I definitely think that, maybe this will shed a little light on it too. Because when I got back, I to my little tunnel, or that area that I was, where that dark void was at the end, it was no longer the dark void. It had changed back to my hospital room. So, you know, that might have been what I would have been looking at, was back into my own life. And of course, when you're dead, you're dead. So it's blackness. But now that I'm coming back to life, it was my hospital room. And I could see the nurses and doctors and everybody working on my body. They had this big green machine on my chest. It was doing chest compressions, called a Lucas machine. And as I was coming back, they took it off, and it looked like a really depressed room. They were really frenzied, and then all of a sudden it looked like just the bottom fell out. So I don't know that they had called time, or how their process is, but I do know that it looked to me like they were just ready to say, hey, this guy's gone for good. And I had been dead for 10 minutes. So, I mean, that's quite a long time. And when you're in the hospital, they're able to monitor your brain activity and your heart rate and everything like that. And they said I had no heart rate, no brain activity. I was dead. I was dead. So as I'm going back to this, the closer I got, I was able to see what people were doing, and what, particularly the charge nurse. She was pretty interesting, because she's moving all over the place, giving people directions on what to do. But I ended up telling her about that. But when they took that Lucas machine off, and then I started to come back into my body, I snapped into my body from behind, kind of just like, if I was coming from behind me right now, and I just snapped back into my body. And being strapped down, I wasn't able to pop up as much as I would like to. And, have hoses and stuff in your mouth, and you got all this stuff going on. But I tried to get up as close to the doctor as I could, because there was a doctor right here, right by my head. And I said, did I just die? And so he had to come a little bit closer. And this part is my favorite. I still like it, because this part makes me laugh. But because he had this look like we just lost this patient. So he went from this, kind of defeated look to this complete shock. And he's like, yeah, you just died. It was like, when I read my hospital notes, it said that I spontaneously revived. And I guess so. I mean, it was like that. I just was back in my body, and I just popped up, and I am talking to this doctor who probably thought I was gone. And now he's looking at this guy who's not only, I didn't have the vitality I have now, but I certainly felt pretty good. I had a lot of ecstasy from where I had just been. So nothing was really shaking me. I just wanted the confirmation that, I had died. I had never experienced that before. It was, it was amazing. And so, he tells me that, and, it was just so amazing, because that positive ecstasy feeling that I had to go and get so I had that defibrillator on my side. Then they had to put a defibrillator and a pacemaker in, because they knew there was something far more devastating with my heart. So they had to put that in up here on my chest. And when they put this one in, they had put some wires down into the heart because the pacemaker has to be able to pace you out of it, and the defibrillator just has to send a shock, but the pacemaker has to actually have wires that tickle your heart a little bit and bring your heart rate back to where it wants it to be. And so when they did this, they couldn't actually give me anesthesia. So they couldn't put me under, they couldn't do any of that. They gave me a little bit of a local, but I felt this whole operation. And normally I would be like, messing with my heart that's already beat up like that. I wouldn't have been real keen on this, but it didn't even bother me. It was so amazing. Me and the doctor were talking about sports, and I really wanted to just have him be quiet because I wanted to think about my experience, right? I was like, you don't have to talk, doc. You can just he was trying to be polite to me, right?
Trying to remember heaven here.
Yeah, exactly. But I didn't, he didn't ask me about what did you see when you died. In fact, amazingly, no doctors except for one, but this was the one who was actually caring for my heart, and she was just a really good woman. But she's the only one who ever asked me, how you doing from that? How you doing after you died? And I said, I'm fine with that. And she's like, really? Usually people don't have that. And so she asked more questions, and we started talking about what I experienced. But none of the other doctors want to talk about that. It kind of baffles me being a psychotherapist myself. I'm so curious about that kind of stuff because it affects people's mental health one way or the other. And when you see a positive outcome, you should be asking a lot of questions. And unfortunately, that's not necessarily where their training takes them.
Do you still work at prison?
No, I no longer work there. In fact, I actually had transitioned to a private company just a couple months before I had my first heart failure.
Okay.
So, and that was part of my issue too, is that I had really started out my career wanting to always help people, and I always did help people. But as you start to get up in your career, you really ambition can kind of cloud your judgment. And while I could justify, I deserve to make more money, but I realized when I was in heaven that I was really about, hey, I deserve this money. I deserve to get this bigger paycheck. So I was, constantly going up in my career, which, to the worldly standard sounds great. But when I looked at it, I wasn't as satisfied with my work as I was, when I was actually in the trenches helping people. And so that's one of the things that I really had to come to terms with. But yeah, I think that we can get so distracted by the glittering things of this world, and it takes us out of our lane, what God really has us intended for. And to be a good person, interacting with justice and kindness and love and charity towards other people, that's really what we're supposed to be doing. And we can't take any of this other stuff with us.
Right.
But I ended up suffering for, I say suffering because it was pretty bad. I don't know if I have, I do actually have it up here, I think. So I kept these, this is how, this is like 200 little hospital admission bands. And so this was a lot of in and out of the hospital that I went through. And it was intense. I was in there for so many times, but so many days, just laying in a hospital bed, and this was even after my experience. And, when I was in heaven, God told me that I was going to suffer, and it was going to be bad. It was going to be worse than it was when I first came there. So I knew going back, it was going to be worse, but I also knew he was going to be with me. So that made it reasonable for me to come back, obviously. But it was as if the suffering was something that I wanted to take on, despite knowing that I'm going to be in that hospital bed, being so vulnerable, because it gave me so much more empathy. I didn't realize the gift that it would be when I was going through it. But if this was such a gift for me, because there isn't a person suffering that I don't have just this huge amount of empathy for, and we often can cause our own suffering. So it's not as if we don't, the suffering's good for us a lot of the time, because it can take us out of our egocentric motivations. Nothing brings us closer to God or closer to goodness than having a hard time, you know, having something happen that we don't necessarily like, because when everything goes our way, we get egotistical. And that's really most of us. I
I think
think
we
that
get
it's very,
bored too when
yeah,
everything's
yeah,
going our way. There's no
yeah,
struggle.
yeah. And people go out and they actually cause their own problems because of that boredom, you know. And but you know, I ended up having to have a heart transplant 2 years later. And I really I held off for far longer than I should have, because God had told me that he was going to give me a new heart. And I thought he was being, you know, like going to actually give me, you know, my heart, but just make it new, fix it. And, but he was being literal. He was going to give me a new heart. So I don't have my own heart in me anymore. I have a different person's heart. And when I finally came to the determination, it was also that same doctor who was so kind and so caring. But she, you know, I said, hey, what's the likelihood of me making it through all this? And she's like, well, she knew how I am. I'm not a person. I don't want you sugarcoating it. I don't want you trying to tell me something, you know, false little, you know, fantasy lullabies. I want the truth. And she said, you know, it's not good, but we're going to fight. You know, I knew she was with me. I knew she was on my side. So, you know, I wasn't worried about it. But having her tell me that it wasn't good, I knew that I had to go the other route and go to transplant. And so I said, okay, well, let's do the transplant. If, you know, if God's going to heal me, he's going to heal me before the transplant. So I'm not worried about that. And if he's not, then I'll have to go through the transplant. And so I went through the transplant, and, you know, it's amazing too, even with that, the day that they kept giving me heart, like calling me and saying, hey, we got this heart for you, but it's just not the right one. And, you know, I'd go into a doctor appointment, they'd say, yeah, we had a heart come in over the weekend, but we didn't call you because it wasn't a good match. And I'm like, oh my goodness, you know, it's such a letdown when you know you're dying and you're so close to die. I mean, I already died one time, you know, 2 years later. So I knew my heart couldn't be doing too much, couldn't be doing any better than it had been when I already died. So I was like, wow, you know, finally I told him, I said, don't let go of the next one, because I'm not going to make it through the end of the week. And I really felt like I was going to die any day now at this point. And so after that appointment, I went back home, and I was in hospice at this time. So, you know, I go back to the hospice care, and I'm laying down, and my mom had to come with me to be my caregiver, because, you know, my wife had to be with the kids and they were in school, and so, you know, this whole thing was so traumatic. But so my mom's, you know, I don't remember what she was doing. She was reading a book or something, and I was like, you know, I'm gonna take a nap, but, you know, I love you, Mom, and if I don't wake up, just, you know, tell my family I love them. And, you know, and I was kind of felt like this might be it. But I went to sleep, and I wake up to this phone call, and it's my transplant nurse, and she's like, Brian, we got a good heart, we got a good one, you know, you got to get in here right now, this heart's going in you. And it was such an amazing call to wake up to, because I really was on death's door. It was so bad that, you know, I'm covered in tattoos, right? People didn't even know I had tattoos, because my skin was so ashen gray that you couldn't really see the tattoos.
Wow.
Yeah, it was so bad. I mean, it was really bad. And so they're, you know, but they got me in there, and under my bed, because when we got back, we had to put this little like a pillow wedge underneath the mattress, because I couldn't lay down flat. I had to lay at an incline. So when we got back to the hospice care, they lifted up this bed to put this wedge under there. And if you ever heard of St. Jude, he's like the patron saint of impossible causes. Well, somebody had put a St. Jude scapular, one of these green scapulars, underneath my side of the bed. And I had been laying on this thing this entire time in hospice care. And when you look at my heart, when they took it out, the doctors went through it with me, and they said, well, this part right here is so damaged, and this part right here. So the whole thing looks ugly. It looks like a dog toy, like
I
some
remember
dog
the
had been chewing.
picture.
Yeah, it's gross, right? It looks
Yeah.
like beef jerky. It's foul. But the doctors are pointing out all these parts, and they're like, your heart could not have functioned. There is no way this heart could have been working. We don't understand it. They called it a medical miracle, but of course now everybody here knows this was a God miracle. But it was so amazing to me to have all these things falling into place, you know. And and it happened to be that I got my heart transplant on Ash Wednesday of
Uh, uh,
2019. And so, that's like the time of renewal. And it's so amazing that, I got this renewal of not just a spirit, but physical renewal too. And I just have been so grateful to God that I just want to live my whole life just shouting from the rooftops about how much he loves people, so that people don't walk around thinking, oh, this God doesn't love me, he doesn't care about me, and I got all these problems. And no matter what our problems are, God loves us. Sometimes we need to just ask him to help us out, and sometimes we need to be able to just accept the fact that he isn't going to give us what we think is good for us. But no matter what, cutting through all the other stuff, he loves us. And that's the important thing, because he's got this place set up for us that is beyond amazing. When I'm telling you that I only saw this little tiny portion of it, it, if that's all heaven was, I would be so excited just to go back to there and just sit there forever. That's how wonderful it was. But knowing that this was not it, I know that there was so much more to it. I can't wait to see what he's got in store. And I just hope everybody else takes that same inspiration and really just opens their hearts up to him.
yeah. Well, thank you, Brian. You said you wanted to cut off at 1 hour and exactly 1 hour. So
What do you
perfect.
know?
Okay. Well, thank you very much for sharing your story. And
Oh, you're
best of
welcome.
luck to you and your family.
Oh, thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.